We are now recording. So, all right. Well, thank you for attending the Elimination of Prejudice monthly webinar series. I'm Gary Sanders, an Elimination of Prejudice board member and today's moderator. This month, we're fortunate to have Dr. John Leeke and David Temple on our panel. They're sharing their stories about joining predominantly white chapters of Pi Lambda Phi during the civil rights era. To put the timeline in historical context, John joined Pi Lambda Phi in 1958. This was just 4 years after the landmark Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education. That decision was a linchpin in the strategic legal challenges to dissemble separate but equal. In short, separation was widely practiced, but it was a giant leap to say anything was equal. Another moment shaping the era was Emmett Till had been murdered a few years earlier when he flirted with a white woman in the South. He was from Chicago, and visiting there, he didn't know the danger of his actions. His mother wanted to see what it was done to her 14-year-old boy. So Dr. Leeke has over 50 years of professional experience as a classroom teacher, guidance counselor, program manager in instruction and human relations, and consultant to many diverse organizations. His practice assists clients in effectively participating in managing their diverse workforces. Activities include assessment and diagnosis, strategic planning, awareness workshops, team building, leadership development, mentoring, and executive coaching. He's a graduate of Indiana State University. Also on our panel, David Temple joined Pi Lambda Phi in 1966. Give a little bit of a context, that timeline, civil rights era had really grown. Martin Luther King and many others had gotten a reluctant Congress to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act, officially making it illegal to discriminate on race, religion, national origin, and sex. 1965 saw the passage of the Voting Rights Act, a significant step in suffocating Jim Crow legislation and practices. The Fair Housing Act and amendments to the Civil Rights Act were still in legislation. Also, Medgar Evers was what many organizers murdered for their efforts to desegregate the South. The Selma March to Montgomery was the previous year. Remember, these are only a few items occurring at the time. Mr. David Temple has held various leadership roles in education and government policy. He has been recognized with the Silver Medal, U.S. States Department of Commerce for Leadership and Workforce Development Skills, Vice President Al Gore's Hammer Award for Excellence in Government Reinvention, District of Columbia Distinguished Public Service Award, Friend of Mental Health Award from Mental Health Association of Northern Virginia, University of Virginia Outstanding Alumnus Award, the Jeannie P. Bales Award for Leadership and Excellence in Virginia Literacy Leadership, E.L. Patterson Education Award, and Pi Lambda Phi's Big Pi Award. He is a graduate of the University of Virginia. Let me begin by asking panelists a few questions, and David will be joining in here soon. He's just running a few minutes late, but John, how did you come to join Indiana State?
It's interesting, Gary. I had grown up in Washington, D.C. However, my roots were in Indiana. I was actually born in Indianapolis, and so when it became time to choose what college I would go to, a couple of things came into play. I was wanting to be a coach, and that meant being a teacher. So Indiana State at the time was Indiana State Teachers College. And so it made sense that I would go there. In addition, though, there were some other linkages. I had grandparents on the mother and father on my mother's side were living still in Terre Haute, Indiana. So from a very financial standpoint, it was really helpful to my family that I could be able to go there. But in addition to that, I had an aunt who had graduated from when it was Indiana State Normal. and she was a teacher and teacher all her life. And my parents had also gone to Indiana State. They actually met there. So that's the reason I chose to go to Indiana State. And as I look back on it, it certainly was a very good decision. Thinking about the fact that my parents had met there, I also met my wife there. And from a standpoint, my parents had taken a picture on the steps of the Student Union building. And Teresa, my wife, and I had our picture taken on the steps. And recently, I went back to do some things on campus, and my daughter and I have a picture of us on those same steps. So lots of memories of Indiana State. And of course, as we will talk a little bit more, a lot of memories of being in Pi Lambda Phi on Indiana State's campus.
Yeah, it's a great legacy with the university. And it's also interesting that you hear about some of the progression to the university from what I think before you'd said today, but it was what, a teacher's college, and then it was normal, and it's evolved quite a bit over the years.
Yes. So.
And then, so share, I know that, so why Pi Lambda Phi? And what was your experience like?
Yeah, it really is interesting. When I went to Indiana State, there were not large numbers of Black students at Indiana State at the time, and I entered in 1957. And as you had said in some of your opening remarks, this was only a very short time after the Brown Forces Board of Education decision. And so when I got to Indiana State, realizing that there were not a lot of Black students at the time, there were no Black fraternities or sororities on campus. And I didn't really give a whole lot of thought about fraternity life, although I would say at that time, the fraternities and sororities pretty much ran the university in terms of what went on around student life. But it was interesting. This was also a time when a number of men who had been in the military were returning and were taking advantage of the GI Bill of Rights and having their education paid for. And those men were a little older than certainly kids like me who were just coming out of high school. They had already experienced life. And so during the first semester, several of them got together and started talking about wanting to form a fraternity on campus. However, because of their experience now and being more mature, they had a couple of big objectives. One objective that they had was they wanted to be in an organization that was open to all, using the common terms of not wanting to exclude people because of their race or their creed or their national origin, any of those kinds of issues. And the second thing was, again, due to their maturity, they were not so interested in the sort of quote, rah, 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 doing things to pledges and things of that nature that were, as they were really not important and were quite immature. So they began to meet, and they began inviting others who had some similar beliefs. And I, along with three of my close friends, we attended the meetings too. And it wasn't long before there were probably over 20, 25 of us. And we wound up during my second semester forming a local chapter, Alpha Delta. So we were accepted on campus and became one of now 6 fraternities. Shortly after we formed it, again, several of the brothers began researching and looking around for the possibility of joining a national fraternity. And given the objectives that I reiterated a few moments ago, they sought out, and Pi Lambda Phi came up on their screen. Given the, as I'm sure most of our audience knows, that they believed in equality. And so we made contact. Naturally, we went through the process of being visited and going through all the steps, and we were accepted, and I wound up being a charter member of the Indiana Alpha Delta chapter of Phi Lambda Phi. That was, and that introduction and all was a very proud moment, very significant, and it has lasted a lifetime.
Yeah. No, that's great and everything. And how would you say was, we're on campus, were you, was the group accepted for being open on there? What were some of the challenges that may have fit?
Yeah, it's interesting, Gary, because this is the late 50s. This is Indiana. This was not necessarily a part of the country, and it certainly wasn't a time when having a mixed fraternity was not necessarily something that lots of people were doing. We did not necessarily experience any what I might call very hostile kinds of things. However, we were accepted by the administration of the college, and we participated in all of the activities. And one of the things that I do remember that certainly left a bad taste was during the pledge season, rush period. Many of the individuals that we were interested in, and we would have the meetings and we would have them come over. We had a house, and it was a house on campus. And when they would come over, and we went through all of the different things, and as we got to know some of the men that we were interested in, some of them, and these were particularly white men, they confided that they were getting a lot of negative comments coming at them because they knew, the other fraternities knew that they were being pursued by Pi Lan. And they said, there were comments like, what do you think about having your girlfriend maybe having to dance with some of those black guys? And they also said, and do you want some black guy telling you when and where and what you could do? Because naturally, as a pledge, you were going to have to do a lot of things, and there were at the time, I think there were probably 7 or 8 black guys belonging to the chapter, along with a couple of Hawaiian brothers. So they did that, but to their credit, they show that they subscribe to the same goals and objectives that the fraternity stood for. When we asked them if they were willing to join, and they said yes. So throughout the time that I was at Indiana State, our chapter was always well mixed, and we had a very good balance of students. Some were outstanding on in the athletic arena. We had some who were excellent in music and drama, and generally during the time I was there, we were either first or second academically. We were a well balanced, well integrated local chapter, and I know it continued throughout those early years. I know. I don't know for sure how much or what the numbers have always been through the years, but that was a little bit of sort of what was going on at the time.
That's great, and thank you for sharing. I think that's wonderful to hear that perspective and everything, and I do see David has been able to join us, so that's wonderful too. And then just reminder, I had one item in there. If anyone has any questions or anything from the audience, feel free to put that in the chat. We're happy to put that in and ask questions and everything. So, and David, welcome.
Hello.
All right. And so, yeah, we had some great comments by John and everything, and did the intro. So let me ask you, start out with your experience. How did you end up in Charlottesville at UVA?
So Gary and others, let me apologize. I'm using my phone at the moment. I don't know what you see. I do hope you see me. And naturally, when I get to my laptop, it decides that it's now going to clean itself up. And so it goes through the routine from 0 to 100% over in the next however many minutes. And I'm watching it buffer and do all of that stuff. So at some point I'll see the rest of you all, but I don't now. Gary, am I being heard well?
I can hear you. Yep. And we've got a picture and everything, so.
Oh, well, that's too bad. So you asked, how did I land in Charlottesville?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't exactly an accident. It was a very purposeful plan for that part of my 18-year-old life. I had been born in Richmond, baby boomer in 1947, to David and Helen, David Sr. and Helen, both children of the Depression. And of course, the Depression was stuck Black people, in other unique ways. But they managed to excel, and Dad got himself, certified as an insurance agent with North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, which was the first African-American insurance company in the country. My mom, very attractive woman, and also pretty much a good salesperson as well. Landed as a retail sales in downtown Richmond, which in those days was a burgeoning retail district. But it was also at the time a very recalcitrant environment for race, for African-American people, and we were colored people at that time. And of course, my parents voted, but they had to pay a poll tax to vote. They didn't have to count the bubbles on the bar of soap, but years before, there were jelly beans that had to be counted, guessed in the jelly bean jar if you were able to vote. Came 1952, went off to elementary school. But by 1953, you may know or recall that the Supreme Court decided via the Brown decision, Brown versus the Board of Topeka, Kansas, that schools had to be integrated. There could be no such thing as separate but equal. In Virginia, the mother of presidents, and the 8 presidents of the Union, decided it had to secede and go to war, and had taken on a leadership role during that period. And so when 53 comes along, Virginia leads the South and becomes the capital of the South, of the Confederacy, and manages to pull together a policy called massive resistance to integration of schools, and taught other Southern states how to put that together, and using public funds to close down public schools and to create private schools for white students. Tough time. So as the years go by, I'm in an all segregated George Mason Elementary School. And for some reason, and I'm not sure how it happened, I found myself watching the political conventions. In those days, there were 4 nights consecutive running, and both Republican and Democratic conventions. And I'm a little kid, and I'm finding myself watching those conventions gavel to gavel. And my parents, of course, they are wondering exactly what is this kid that they have there? But at some point, I was picking up some socio-political engagement, which was to last me until this day. And in the mock convention in our George Mason Elementary School in 1956, remembering now that when Black people largely voted for Republican candidates at that time, because they were the party of Lincoln, the Democrats, that the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, who had freed us. And I found myself voting for Adlai Stevenson in the mock convention. Of course, Stevenson got 2 votes, and 200 Black elementary school kids voted for Dwight Eisenhower, as their parents would have. But I'm now a social political animal somehow, and I know it. And so when I go to middle school in 1959 to 60, and then high school in the fall of 61, I'm very much involved in the campaign to elect John F. Kennedy, President of the United States. And naturally, of course, I'd gotten my hands on a lot of bumper stickers and plastered the school with Kennedy bumper stickers. Didn't sit well with the principal or anywhere else, but that's where I was. But I also heard John Kennedy say in that inaugural to ask not what your country could do for you, but what you could do for your country. And that the baton had been handed to a new generation of Americans. And I heard him speaking directly to me. And I will tell you that in subsequent years, in my adult years, as I had the occasion to move around the country in various meetings and gatherings in political endeavor, I met all kinds of young people who had been engaged as I did. They heard the same calling to go to work for your country and to not to ask for something in return for it. Kennedy wins, and I'm now in Armstrong High School. There are 400 other kids in my class at all Black Armstrong High School. And during the spring of 1963, I'm invited to come to downtown to an NAACP meeting, Youth Council, where we would meet with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee representatives who had come to Richmond to engage young people in the possibilities of helping to in the effort to desegregate public accommodation. And we learned all of the tactics of falling, covering your head, locking arms in the event that terrible things that had happened in the Deep South might happen in Richmond. But our effort was to desegregate restaurants in downtown Richmond. And so during that summer of 63, I did on every weekend with about 9 other kids. And we were led by a SNCC leader. And we would go in and sit, and they would ask us to leave, and we would refuse. And some who were 18 and over were arrested. I was 16 and had to go home or be referred to juvenile district court. And then finally, I decided that I wanted my red badge of courage. And I suddenly turned 18. And they didn't know how old I was. They didn't know how to read our ages in any event. We all looked alike, certainly in those days. So they took me down to the Richmond lockup, and I'm just feeling really good throughout that whole period. Of course, my father, he's really boasting and breastfeeding, and he's telling all of his friends, that Temp Jr., that's my nickname, went to jail. He's in jail, and he's just really, really proud. But I say all of this to say, and I will come to a soon conclusion. At that point, it's very clear to me that I do have a responsibility, not only to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But you had to stand up and do it. You had to fortify yourself. You had to show people that there was a tangible and galvanizing spirit and something that was physical about your behavior. And so the time came for those of us who were good students and who at this point could go to desegregated post-secondary schools. Counselor called us in and as a group and said, where do you think you want to go? These are some of these colleges, and this is what that offers. That's what that offers. No one offered the University of Virginia. And I was aware that substantially the policymakers who had created the massive resistance approach to life in in Richmond and other places in the South had been graduates of UVA or other Virginia institutions. And I was determined that I was going to go there, and I was going to do my part. It was the same as I was going to go into a restaurant back in '63. I was accepted and joined, and UVA was an all-male institution, undergraduate at that time. You know, understand it's a public institution, but all male. And there were 4 other African-American men who came to the university that fall. And so I end up in a dormitory as the only African-American. And this was a very challenging time. I decided I was going to go visit all of those suites. I was going to see how many people I could meet and who could meet me. And at some point, some of them were polite and engaging and wanted to engage in a very social engagement and would ask me all kinds of questions, which I felt that was my responsibility to do. I was there as a trailblazing in some manner. And then one day, it was bid weekend. Fraternities had sent out, had come by to visit guys in the various dormitories, and came to my dormitory with to meet my white roommate, John, who was also a Richmonder. And in those days, you could agree on your application for an all-white roommate or other race and roommate. And John was an exceptionally likable fella, you know, and he was wearing the UVA uniform of the day, which was, you know, a blue blazer, white shirt, probably a red tie, penny loafers with no socks. And the door was a tap, tap. And so there were about 13 tap taps. And by the way, I was dressed in my UVA sweatshirt and jeans, working on my German homework. And he got about 13 visits at that point. And then there was a tap tap that came. And they asked David Temple, looking at John. I was sitting behind the other side of the door, and John's eyes widened with uh-oh, you know, and he pointed to me, and the ashen face, white face came to my locked eyes on mine. And yes, I'm David. And my job then was to help them to relax. Because it was obviously a very awkward moment, awkward for them, awkward for me. I had not expected them, and they knew I hadn't expected them. And it clearly was a big mistake. And they went through their ritual. And so then came another, you know, and I'm saying to myself, well, why not a fraternity? Why not me at this place? I knew there was no other African-American in the fraternity. After all, there had only been 15 other Black undergraduates before me at UVA. And there were none. In fact, they had come to me and said, don't think about all of that, Temple. Don't do that. That's not going to happen to you. And so, of course, I did the exact opposite. So there came a day when some of our dormitory friends, and this was our second year, Alan Silverman, had been a student high school student in Alexandria, who was now a friend of a cohort of ours, had received a letter from a friend who was at William and Mary and in Pi Lambda Phi there, a fraternity called Pi Lam. And it said, you know, these guys have a creed that, you know, Jews and Gentiles and others and colored people, all in the same fraternity. And this is great here, and maybe you ought to check it out. And told them who the executive secretary was and gave him the contact information. And Alan sent the letter to the executive director of Pi Lam, And you will know his name is George Beck, who has left us just a few years ago. But George became everything Pi Lambda Phi. And of course, when he received Alan's letter, the car was already smoking before he could get to it. And George was down in Charlottesville the very next day. And it turns out this had been his fraternity at UVA. And they had all been here, a Jewish fraternity, until 1941, and then had gone on hiatus all to go fight Adolf Hitler. And so we decided at that time that we would pursue it. We did. I will skip to the end of this for the moment. You can ask some questions, but we had to fight. It was, our applications were rejected 2 times by the dean of students, who vowed that no N would ever join one of his fraternities. And sure enough, this N was not allowed. Our brothers would not hear of it when I suggested that maybe, just maybe, I should step out for the moment. And that once we were on grounds, which is UVA speak for campus, that you could bring me in as a pledge and all of that, and they just wouldn't have it. And George absolutely was adamant that that would not be the case. And I was so warmly responded to in that regard. I'm tearing up a little bit now as I think back on that, because that told me that either you are in it or we're not doing it. But it was a vigorous fight. We became the first UVA fraternity with an African-American or a person of any other race, and then Jews and Christians and others also were housed. And this is all very revolutionary moment at UVA. Long story, but I thought I had to give it to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I know that, and holding the phone too, the whole time on there. So,
well, finally, I'm now able to open.
well, I have a great question from the audience here. Let me ask John that while you kind of get resituated, and but then I'll also ask it for you, David. So John, the good question here that says, was there a brother in particular who was there for you, who made you feel accepted, and who made Pi Lambda Phi a brotherhood for you?
I would say that there were a number of brothers. My situation at Indiana State was quite different than what you just heard David talk about, because different for me, Virginia is the South. Even though I grew up in Washington, D.C., and many people considered it the South, when I was in high school, I was already having a different type of experience, because my high school was a Catholic high school. And when it was opened in 1951, the Archbishop of Washington at the time made it absolutely clear that it would be open to all. So when I entered in 1953, there had already been 2 previous classes, because I was in the 3rd class of Archbishop Carroll High School. And there were already a number of Black students. And in my class of 1957, there were 19 of us, and there were 209. So being in a an integrated setting in schooling was not a new experience. It had not been an experience of where that I had to fight or others had to fight for my admission and all. So that was I came to Indiana State with a different experience than what David was saying. But to the question, there is one brother particularly that had tremendous impact on me. And that was Fred Dobbins. Fred was our first Rex, and I actually followed him when he left and graduated. I moved into the role of Rex, and Fred and I maintained contact throughout our life, and particularly through Fred's life, because when Fred left, shortly after he became a field rep for the fraternity, and of course, if some of you look at your history, Fred was on the board and has always been a highly respected Pi Lam. Fred was my best man at my wedding, and so we maintained our connection. We visited each other. I got to know his family, and we still make contact with each other. And Fred truly epitomized the creed, the code of Pi Lam, and he was a fighter. He was a champion. No doubt about it. I'm sure that for any of the alums, they could testify to just what type of man that Fred was. And as a result, I think of that friendship that we had and the brotherhood that we developed and maintained over the years really stands out. He's one of several men who I learned from. We did a number of things later in life when he was in Charlotte, North Carolina, as a deacon in the church there. So he would be the one. Yes.
That's great, John. And I know that, Fred had, served as president and everything like that for quite a while. And the international fraternity, and an executive secretary at the time, and did quite a bit of service. And you've also stayed in contact with his son Max.
Yes.
Fred,
as well as his wife, Muchi, and I can remember us visiting them when he was living in New York, and then of course I visited him several times when he was in Charlotte.
Yeah, and that's a pretty amazing friendship and everything like that. And then let me ask you, I think David might be joining, working through his problems here, but
I'm here.
Yeah, we can see he's on his laptop now.
I thought should I transition to a new question, or I think David, you're able to hear us and everything's connected?
I'm all connected. Thank you. Thank you,
So,
everybody.
yeah, so that's terrific and everything. So let me share the same question for you that came from the audience. I think it's a great one. That so was there a brother in particular who was there for you, who made you feel accepted, and who made Pi Lambda Phi a brotherhood for you?
You won't believe it. I got it. I was just interrupted saying this meeting has stopped. All right. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, do you want me to go ahead and repeat the question?
Please do it.
Sure thing. So
Amazing.
was there a brother in particular who was there for you, who made you feel accepted, and who made a Pi Lambda Phi brotherhood for you?
Oh, well, all of them were one brother. We were, I mean, at this point, it had become a crusade. And I mean, I think there may have been one with whom I was closest. Larry Golden, who is no longer with us, from Westport, Connecticut. And Larry lived next door in our first year dormitory, and in the new dorms at Alderman Road, which was at UVA at that time. But we were just very, very close. We were buddies.
Mhm.
And we had gone through fire. So
Yeah, great and everything. And one thing I noticed in, and having conversations with both of you is, David, start with you, is you had, spoke about George Beck, who was executive secretary, which was equivalent of executive director. So the main person with the headquarters, had the car running. It was some UVA and his love for that, but it was also to it and his, taking the strong stance of having that. And was that something special for you, of having the, a headquarters and that support in such a thing, strength?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was, first of all, it helped that he had his own experiences at Virginia. But he also had his perspectives, fraternity perspectives. When he left there, it was, the country was at war, and Jews were being savaged in other parts of the globe. And there were places in the United States that were not easy for Jewish Americans. So, he and I bonded around the issues of fairness and equality and non-discrimination in very powerful ways. And when he refused to let me quit, and I'll confess, and as I did later, that I only had one toe in the water of quitting, but I felt like I had to offer it up. He was very adamant that was not going to happen. And he and Steve Cole, whom we elected as our colony president, Cole also Jewish from Yorktown Heights, New York, still very much involved with our fraternity. Steve was doing all of the on the ground work and following George's guidance and direction with the Interfraternity Council on grounds. And in the Fraternity Council was also being advised and guided by Dean Runk, who was then, as I mentioned, the Dean of Students, who was adamant that we would not have this kind of social environment on the grounds of UVA. So George was not going to, he was not going to have it. And I watched him. I learned so much from, this was not going into the restaurant, having beer or other fecal matter or something else thrown at you, which had happened earlier. George was, he had savvy. He knew how to manage Dean Runk. He knew what Dean Runk wanted and what Runk could not stand. And ultimately what happened was that George knew some of Dean Runk's fraternity brothers in Zeta Psi on the campuses across the country, and was very clear to want to talk to some of them if ultimately Runk didn't give up on his adamance about our entry on grounds.
Mhm.
And so I think that was the final, that's when the Dixie flag had fallen, and we actually came on. But remember, our effort began in the fall of 1966, which was our second year, which is UVA speak for sophomore. And we didn't get chartered until the spring of 1969, which was our graduation year.
Yeah. But in there, and John, we were speaking before, I think, and kind of in the warm up and everything, and you had a story about being with Jack Buchheit, and driving car to Illinois. And how was that an impact for you? I think is, having that, hey, you're in car with, staff where I'm sure there might be other organizations that would, not be as welcome and things.
Yeah. I look back at it now and it's sort of humorous, but at the time, boy, was I was I guess I was maybe 20 by now, and it was a time that Jack and Fred had come out, because Fred was now on field rep, and they were doing what is normal, visiting some of the chapters, and they were out in the Midwest, and so naturally Fred was going to come by our chapter, and so they were planning then to go over to the University of Illinois in Champaign, and it was wintertime. And so Jack had of course rented a car, and I'm not even sure why it was, but I was the driver of the car. And so it was Jack and Fred, myself, and I think two other brothers. And on the way back from Champaign to visit there, it was snowing, and roads were a little bit slippery, and as you can imagine, the car slid off the road and into the ditch. And it was kind of like, they say, your life flashes in front of you, and here I'm having this story that the write-up in the newspaper is this young undergraduate driving his executive secretary and field rep around. And I mean, fortunately, it wasn't a bad thing. We were not hurt. The car wasn't damaged, and we were able to get the car out of the ditch and continued the trip on back to Terre Haute. But that was my second time with Jack. And then the unfortunate time, and some of you probably, again, looking at the history, in the just before Christmas of 1960, Jack was on the plane that the really terrible crash in which all of the passengers were killed, and Jack was among the crew. And so his funeral was over the Christmas holidays, and And I had come home to DC for the holidays, and Fred called me and asked me if I would be willing to be one of the pallbearers for Jack's funeral, which was taking place in Williamsburg. Jack had been a graduate of William and Mary, and he had said that was he made it very clear he wanted to be buried there in Williamsburg. And interestingly, as I had said, I had very little experience at that time being in the South. Washington was as far south as I had been. And so I took a trip down and went down on the bus to Williamsburg. And it was my first really time to have a sense of what it was like for a Black person in the South. And I had heard about, by that time I had, read things about how that Black people were supposed to step off. If you were walking down the street and a white person was coming toward you, you stepped off and stepped into the street. And I saw that. That was that was a very different thing. I just had not had any significant experience. And then the other thing was that after the funeral was over, we went to the home of the woman who I guess had acted as kind of like a mother for Jack when he was at William and Mary. And she hosted a dinner for, some of the individuals. And again, of course, I was the only Black there. And I thought to myself, and this may not have been true for her, but it was almost like she couldn't take her eyes off of me. And I got to thinking, I bet she is having a real fit with me sitting there at her table, eating off of her fine china. And no, but I mean, nothing was said. Again, lots of folks are quite polite and mannerly and so forth. And I'm sure she had some sense of what Jack was like, and would not have wanted to have done something that would have displeased him. So, but that's life.
Great. And thank you for sharing that and everything. So I know we're about time, but we asked one question of both of you here. And so what advice would you have for young people today when it comes to, from your experiences and about getting along and John, if you want to answer that one, or
yeah, I will. I think a couple of things that I would say. One of the things that I think is just so very crucial, particularly during these times when there are, challenges to return to almost pre-slavery days, certainly back to the Jim Crow era. And that is to study the history, know the history of our country. And that's the full history. We're in the month of February right now, which is Black History Month. And for a long time now, we think that's that's the only time we learn about Black history. Well, I don't know how you can know about American history and not know and have significant learnings about what has happened to Black people, as well as other people of color, because they've all been a part of America. That's a piece that I think I would say to all, regardless of your race, your religion, your creed, whatever, know the history. Do not get into this place where we are right now of quote, critical race theory. You know, in order for us to continue to move forward, we need to know the history and pay attention to the pattern, the theme. And one of them that is so much a part of our country's history is that every time there has been a significant move to move toward full acceptance of all people, we have it. And then as quickly as possible, the people who don't like that organize themselves. If you think back to when we did away with slavery and the era of Reconstruction, and how quickly the folks who resented that organized, and we had all the Jim Crow laws. And then we went a long period until the Civil Rights Movement. And then we had all of the massive civil rights legislation. And that opened all kinds of doors. I mean, we've talked about that a bit earlier. And then there was Nixon and a few others who came in here and started changing things. And one of the individuals that I lean heavily on is she wrote a book about the mass incarceration. And there again, now we've gone through, and then we come to President Obama. Barack Obama gets elected by massive numbers, not just once, but twice. And now look at the reaction to that, because we're experiencing that. We're experiencing that right now in terms of all of the actions and to turn us away, to literally challenge the very democracy that this country was founded on and stands for. So I hope that if some of the young folks that may have the opportunity to hear this webinar, take that as the thing you want to make sure you do, to not allow us to go backwards.
It's a great message, John. Thank you so much. David, now for you, what advice would you have?
First of all, amen, John. You know, I would say that I know from my own experience that research was done in the 1980s, late 1980s, by Ronald Reagan's Department of Labor. And the product was Workforce 2000. And in that body of work, the evidence would show that by the second decade in the 21st century, that the combined numbers of people of color, that is Latinos, African Americans, Asians, other immigrants, women in general, would overwhelm the number of white men in the American workforce from that point on, continually into the 21st century, which is where we are now. I knew at the time that that would have a potent for very troubling times somewhere in the 21st century with regard to the matter of race. I believe that where we are is that we have entities like Fox News who, rather than refer back to research some 30 some years ago, which suggested that these demographic changes would occur so that they would not be necessarily a shock to the body politic, particularly white men, somewhere in, say, 2020, which is what I think it is now. I think the basis for this is now fear and deep anxiety about the browning of America. There are cities and there are states, or soon will be in some classrooms, where brown and other colored people exceed the raw numbers of white people. That's a very threatening visage for many Americans, as we saw on January 6th. And I worry that starting with Donald Trump's attacks on Barack Obama for 6 years running, that he was not really an American, that he was a flawed and illegal president. And that's inspired so many white people to believe that. In fact, 50% by one poll at one time showed that 50% of the American electorate believed that Barack Obama was not legally a president of the United States. And I think that set off, first of all, his popularity, because he stood up, he said out loud, you can put black people in their place. You can put a black man in that place. Moreover, you can put a black president in his place. And we haven't seen the civility that we once knew since. So I would say to young people, or to others, those who are listening here and watching, and those who will see this later, that if you want to live and to engage in a civil America going forward in your lifetimes, well beyond John's and my lifetimes, and for your own children and grandchildren, if you find yourself in a place where relatives or others are actually saying racist things, or things that you know not to be true, things that in your mind and in your heart, if you were in another place and time, you might challenge, but you decide, I don't want to do this here because I'm not going to see those people again. I'll just move along. You have a responsibility to stand up for our democracy. Because if we don't, we're not going to have a democracy. These people have shown they are willing, they have seen it now, that it's either democracy, which includes black people and brown people, or whiteness will still be superior in numbers and in power, and it can't be the same thing, one and the same. So I ask you to stand up. We have a creed that I know you know, and it says that we will fight for our freedom, and we believe that. And we may have to fight for our freedom. And I ask you just to show it in any context with other people whom you know, sending us off and veering us off into the wrong direction. I think it's your responsibility as an American citizen.
And I would add, as a Pi Lam.
Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, John. And those are incredible messages and everything. And thank you for sharing your experiences. You know, we're fortunate to hear all of your work towards eliminating prejudice. And I don't think we even scratched the surface. We just covered the undergraduate years and didn't get into your, you know, postgraduate work and things that you did and you both did in education and you know, other aspects of your life. So thank you for that. And you know, our goal of the Elimination of Prejudice Foundation is to create a better understanding among people. You know, regardless of your race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, all of this can make a difference. It's important to look beyond the surface and understand why we're reacting that, you know, why a community may react one way to new voting requirements, how it may react you know, to information that's being shared or disinformation and misinformation. So a reminder that, you know, delivery can sometimes be more important than content. You know, our job of eliminating prejudice is an ongoing effort. You know, we've made progress over the years. We still have a ways to go. And, but history has shown that we have progress and we have regression. And we have to constantly put up that battle. You know, one conversation can make a difference. It could be reaching out and including others who are different from you. It may be challenging a friend or family member to educate them. Our challenge is to find out how to educate, not just in content, but also in delivery. On that, you know, please visit our website at eliminateprejudice.org. We will share the recording of today on there, and you know, please feel free to share it. And then we invite you to join the Eliminate Prejudice Foundation's outreach efforts. If you want to make a contribution to help continue our effort to eliminate prejudice. Once again, thank you, John. Thank you, David. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night, brothers.
Night.
Good night.